Okay, so in this video, we were talking about using rocks in our bonsai containers to help us tell a story with our tree. Hey, good morning, everyone. If you're new here, I'm from a nursery here in Minnesota. We specialize in bonsai and we love to share what they learned over the years with you guys at home. So today we're talking about rocks in the landscape. So often when people are putting together a bonsai, they want to put it in a container that has some sort of drainage hole, and then they fill that bottom up with some sort of rocks. The rocks are primarily used to hide the drainage hole, but also it helps keep the weight down in the container. And so having those rocks in there does serve a purpose. But what we're going to talk about today is how to use rocks as part of the design, as part of the story that you're telling with your bonsai. Now, the first thing that we're gonna not cover here is how to use pebbles and small stones to create rivers and waterfalls within your bonsai pots. One of the things that we really want to do when we recreating a riverbed or a waterfall is make sure that we have some sort of movement going on. So if you look at this particular container here, these pieces of stone run from one side of the pot all the way to the other, kind of mimicking like a river that would go through the pot. And the same thing goes for something like a waterfall. If we look at this container here, we can see that we have a piece of bark in the back, and then we have a piece of stone in the front. And these are actually the two tallest points in the entire display. And so they create kind of a focal point as your eye goes through the display. It sees that piece of bark, sees that piece of stone, and that really gives the illusion of water flowing from one area to another. And so when we're using things like pebbles and small stones, we need to think about where the height points are in our display and how we're going to get the viewer SI to move throughout the entire scene. And then we also want to be thinking about the different textures that we're using. When we think of a river, we think of smooth, round stones. Sometimes you might find like a jagged rock sticking up above the river, but mostly the river itself is going to be made up of smooth, rounded stones. And so in this particular case, we've got some stones here that are a little bit more angular, but overall they're pretty smooth. We don't want to have any sharp edges sticking out. That could potentially damage our tree, but overall, we want them to be pretty smooth and rounded. And the same thing goes for a waterfall. We want to have some nice smooth stones along the front edge of our waterfall. And we can even add some moss into there to kind of blend everything together. The next thing that we can do with our rocks is to use them to create cliffs and outcroppings. Now, when we're doing this, we want to try and create some sort of verticality in our display because sometimes trees will grow around rocks. They'll grow around cliffs. So we want to try and mimic that in our bonsai. This particular display here has some very tall, upright branches, and it's surrounded by some smaller rocks. And so the rocks aren't necessarily the focal point, but they do accentuate the tree nicely. And they also just give us some additional texture. In this particular display, we've got some slightly larger rocks, and we've intentionally placed them lower down in the pot, and that creates kind of an outcropping effect. And then we've got some smaller stones along the top of the pot, and that really draws your eye from the bottom of the pot to the top of the pot. And this particular tree has very horizontal branches. And so the contrast between the horizontal branches and the vertical rocks really makes the whole display pop. Another thing that we can do with our rocks is we can create kind of a rock garden effect. And so in this particular case, we've got a lot of small stones in the pot. And instead of trying to have them line up perfectly, we've actually intentionally tried to misalign all of the rocks. And that creates a nice natural look. And it looks like there's a lot of work that went into it, but really it was fairly simple to do. All we did was take our stones and we just kind of threw them in there. And then we added some gravel on top to help blend everything together. And this particular tree is a juniper, and junipers tend to do really well in rock gardens. So this style works out really well for this particular tree species. And another thing that we can do with our rocks is to use them to hide the base of our tree. Sometimes I'll see that there is a bare spot at the base of our tree and we want to hide that. And so we can use stones to do that. In this particular case, we've got some small stones that run around the bottom of the pot. And that really helps hide that bare spot and makes the pot look a lot fuller. And so we can use stones to really complement the tree and make it look a lot better. Now, another element that we can use in addition to stones are things like pieces of bark. These pieces of bark were actually collected from the forest floor, and so we can use them to create waterfalls. We can use them to create cliffs. Or in this particular case, we were using it to create kind of a natural stair-step effect along the side of the pot. And then we were going to fill in all of the cracks with some moss, and that will really blend everything together. And then we can use stones in conjunction with the bark. So in this particular case, we've got a piece of bark that runs along the side of the pot, and then we've got stones that run along the top. And so this is a really simple way to create a lot of interest in your pot without having to spend a ton of time doing it. In addition to using stones and pieces of bark, we can also use things like corrugated metal flashing. This stuff is typically used for roofing, but it also works out really well in bonsai. We can bend it, we can shape it, we can cut it, and it creates some really unique looks. In this particular case, we've created kind of a trough along the side of the pot, and then we've filled that trough with some moss. And it creates kind of a nice stair-step effect, and it really blends the tree into the pot nicely. When we're deciding how big of rocks to use in our display, we want to think about the size of the container. We do want to have huge rocks in a small container because it's just not going to look natural. And so we really want to try and choose rocks that are going to fit the size of our container. And the same thing goes for the tree. We don't want to have a small tree and large rocks because, again, it's not going to look right. So we want to choose rocks that complement the size of our container and the size of our tree. Another thing that we want to think about when choosing our rocks is the color of the rocks and how that is going to complement the bark of our tree. In this particular case, we've got a lot of brown and gray tones going on, and that really complements the bark of the tree nicely. In this particular case, we've got some red rocks, and that really makes the orange tones of the bark pop. And then in this particular case, we've got some white stones, and that really makes the dark bark pop. If you're looking for inspiration, we've got lots of examples here at the nursery. Feel free to come in and check them out. We'd love to see you. Another great place to find inspiration is online. There's some really talented bonsai artists out there doing some amazing work. So spend some time looking through their photos, and that should give you some ideas for how to incorporate rocks into your own bonsai displays. Well, hopefully this video was helpful. If you have any questions about using rocks in your bonsai, feel free to leave them in the comment section below. Also, please consider liking this video and subscribing to our channel. We love making videos for you guys, and we hope you enjoy watching them. So thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.